Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today at SOFTRAX for this afternoon's presentation. Before we get started, I'll just run through a couple of quick housekeeping things as people are still trickling in. This is a CPE eligible webinar, so please, you can see the GoToWebinar console on the right side of your screen. There will be 4 polling questions sprinkled throughout the presentation today, so please, when we stop our poll, do answer those polling questions. With your full participation, this event is worth 1 CPE credit in the field of accounting. There will also be a survey at the webinar's conclusion. That's very helpful for our feedback if you can take a few seconds at the very end and answer that survey in the GoToWebinar console. And it looks like we should be good to go. So I'll just go ahead and I'll just do some quick introductions and then I'll turn it over to our main presenter. My name is Ian. I head up marketing here at SOFTRAX. And I'm very happy to be joined by Tom Zauli today, our general manager. I think I'm very excited about this presentation. I think Tom has an excellent presentation for you. Really forward-looking, should be a very exciting topic about the practical path to continuous accounting and the future of the modern back office. So here it is again, just one more note on the housekeeping. At any point, questions can be submitted through that same GoToWebinar console. You can see the question box. Feel free to submit a question at any point. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end. If by some chance we don't have enough time to answer all the questions, we'll make sure to reach out afterwards and provide an answer to those questions. You'll be contacted directly, and then if you do answer those 4 polling questions, if you would, like CPE credit, we will go ahead and we'll distribute those certificates via email at the conclusion of the event. No action required on your part. So with that, I can probably turn it over to Tom. And Tom, would you like to go through the agenda?
Okay, thank you, Ian, and thank you everybody for attending today. I'm going to go kind of quickly because there is a lot to cover. So we're going to focus on continuous accounting and speak, specifically to the revenue management process. Cover what it is, is it worth it? Can it be done? And then we'll go over, why have there been problems in the past? Because as many of you know, we've been talking about this for a long time. And also why we think it's possible and why we think now is really the right time to be at least thinking about it, if not actually doing it. We'll then talk a little bit about, how do you get there? And there's challenges all over the place, obviously, but we're going to focus on, what is the right infrastructure to support this? How should the data flow? And importantly, what are the impacts in terms of the organization, people, processes? So let's just dive right in. Continuous accounting, this is a definition from Wikipedia. And it just basically, at least in this definition, it's just basically saying that, accounting by its nature or from its roots has occurred primarily as a large job at the end of the period. So we talk about the close period, and you see close periods that go anywhere from less than a day to a couple of weeks or even more. Continuous accounting, by this definition, suggests a distribution of that workload, throughout the period. So it's more of a iterative approach than like one large batch job. I won't read the whole slide off, obviously, but that is sort of the classical definition, if you will. We think of it differently when we take it further. So, SOFTRAX as a business is focused obviously on revenue management, so order to cash and order to revenue recognition. Those are the conversations that we have all day, every day. Those are the problems we think about. And in those, the way we view continuous accounting is, can you structure a process where as orders are closing, there's really no need to touch them beyond the initial order. And by order, I mean not just the initial order or the initial capture, but also the post-processing events that occur that impact order to revenue and order to cash. And I think probably everybody is always looking to automate, drive efficiencies, and everybody realizes it's not an easy problem. But hopefully, when we get through this, you'll see that there is a path. And this is an update to webinars we've presented in the past, over the past couple of years. But I mean, we're constantly evolving and improving, and I think there will be some significant updates if you've seen those prior webinars. And with that, I think we have our first polling question.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Tom. So I'll go ahead and I'll launch the poll in a just a minute here, but the first question is very simply, how would you characterize your current level of automation? Are you 100% automated in the back office with accounting and finance, or are you at some other level of automation? So I'll go ahead and launch the poll. You can please go ahead and vote on the poll. Like I said, just for housekeeping, in order to be CPE eligible at the end of the hour, please do try and answer all 4 polling questions.
So we'll give you a minute to answer, but it'll be interesting to see how far people are. We ask this question frequently throughout the years, and it's varied. It's gone up and down, but
always interesting to see the evolution from webinar to webinar.
Yeah.
All right, so it looks like almost everyone has voted. Looks like we're at about 94%. I'll just give it a couple more seconds. So if you're still thinking, please just go ahead and submit that answer. And I'll close it up and I will share the results. All right, so Tom, here we go.
Yep. So I would say not too unexpected. There's people running at 100% automation, which is good to hear. One of the things I will say is that at least for our business, we're focusing on complexity. So I think that if the business is simple enough, and I would think about maybe a SaaS company that just sells strictly the subscription to SaaS versus having to deal with training and services and all that stuff. If it's simple enough, then I think that there are companies that are running 100%. What we're trying to do is drive 100%, even in complexity, which is really the only place we play. I mean, people call us obviously because the core ERP can't handle it. And then in that space, I think these numbers are reflective. So you've got 27% that are doing a pretty good job but have some spreadsheets, and then another 50% that are 50-50. And then a fairly healthy chunk at 20% that's less than 50, and that's in line with what we typically see. And that is the market we pursue basically. So.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah. So first question, is the juice worth the squeeze? Meaning, continuous accounting, like everything, it requires an investment in time and effort. Is it worth it? And these metrics, you can find them just about anywhere in the literature. That they had not changed through time, and they are bold metrics. I mean, talking about a 90% reduction in manual processes, and arguably that should be a higher number. 90% reduction in risk, which actually for many of our clients is more important than the efficiency savings. They're just worried about somebody doing something that they shouldn't be doing, an error occurring in the system. Nobody wants a comment letter. Nobody wants to have to restate, obviously. Close, speeding up close and not having the stress of close. I think that is a big benefit, especially for the teams involved. Internal, external audit, the cost to maintain. Now, obviously, there's initial investment before you gain the cost savings. That's just the reality of the beast. Very hard to do this, running full speed without help. So. And one of the biggest things for me, is just the real-time status on the business and knowing you have accurate data any day of the week in terms of how your business is doing. As an example of this, Tesla on the West Coast, if you walk the factory floor out there, they have large monitors all over the place that are reporting on all aspects of the business, not just finance, but also the speed of the production line, the efficiency of the production line. Those monitors are constantly changing because they're constantly improving the process. And it's an example of the final bullet, which is agility. And agility, not just from a business perspective, meaning, I start to sell a new product, making sure my finance systems keep up. But also these systems themselves, you have to avoid the situation where you create something brittle that can't be changed, and that's happened frequently. So, these systems, whatever investment you make has to be able to withstand change. Otherwise, it's just going to end up breaking and you're going to be back at ground zero again. And we'll talk about it at the end of the presentation, but obviously this is both a finance and a technology problem that does require additional skill sets. So looking to the past, why have things not worked in the past? I mean, having gone through the 90s and the first decade of the 2000s, I mean, I think that a big go-to play was to deploy, what I'd call big ERP. You call Oracle, SAP, and usually you would sign the software deal. They would introduce you to the services team, and you would write another very large check because they would come in, realize where there were gaps, write the customizations or whatever, and they, arguably they could get to a high level of automation. Problem is now you're in a customized environment. So what happens when you want to upgrade? And one of the things I thought of after the fact, I wish we added, was a polling question in terms of how many people are on the current version of their ERP system, or even a version in the last year. And what, the big problem with that approach, I think you could get to a pretty good level of automation, but the big problem was those customizations typically drove at least version lock-in and sometimes vendor lock-in. And so, it became a massive project to upgrade the ERP because you would have to upgrade and retest all the customizations. And that is really, it's an extremely difficult situation when you think of trying to get to a continuous accounting. The other big problem shifting right is this problem is actually getting worse, not better, in many ways, because we've just gone through a period and we're going through a period really where we have new business models. People are trying to optimally monetize their relationships with their clients, or should be, right? It's driving them into subscription billing type models, more complex sort of value-oriented models. We've had a ton of new regulation between 606, 842, 340. I mean, statutory tax, there's no end to it. And one thing that we always include, although I still think it's just coming up, is the Internet of Things, which puts a lot of pressure on the hard good manufacturers out there, taking their order to cash from what was a fairly simple process to something pretty darn complicated. And the other thing that really has been causing problems and preventing people from getting very far is just moving applications to multi-tenant cloud. We think it's the way to go. There's no question. It's really essential to make any progress at all, for lots of reasons we'll get into. But unfortunately, the idea of customizing, like heavily customizing a multi-tenant cloud app, it's not easily done, and nor should it be done. And we'll speak a little bit about that in later slides as well. So these things have all been problems to getting to a continuous accounting framework. Another big problem, and one that we're going to address in the middle part of this presentation, is, when you think about automation, we think of this analogy of ripples on a pond, and maybe the 80-20 rule, and like we say here, more like 99-1. But the problem is, once you start injecting processes in the middle of the order to cash flow, people are touching things in the middle. As soon as that happens, you're losing synchronization between systems, and you're also injecting doubt, right? Did they make an error entering the data? Did something go wrong? And you have to inject controls, sometimes manual controls, to make sure that you catch it if something occurred. And it creates problems, and it really is an inhibitor. Even a single one is an inhibitor to reaching a continuous accounting framework. And certainly if you have multiple of those occurring, it's an inhibitor. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And again, agility is a key factor. So, with those things in place, can the business really be agile? So a little bit about why we think continuous accounting is possible before we get into the main meat of this webinar. I'll start with the bottom. So if you think about accounting, I mean, it's extremely complicated. I mean, there's literally thousands and thousands and millions of calculations that occur every day for each of the companies out there. But if you think about it, if you think about computers and their core capabilities, I mean, that is exactly what they were designed to do. I mean, they're not, at this point, arguably not, self-aware in terms of intelligence. But in terms of rigorous calculation and performing those calculations without error, they really can't be beat. And I always love the analogy of Alan Turing and the Ace pilot engine, because there was a a flash of brilliance in the 40s for World War II, where they like many people on the planet were trying to break the Enigma code, and this was the code that Nazi Germany was using to transmit war plans and things like that. Turing realized that the only way they were going to be able to beat this code was not through sort of human in the loop computation, but by building a machine that did not and never had existed before that. And that machine, I mean, very similar to the kinds of and level of calculation that occurs in accounting. It just ran through millions and millions of what ended up being very small calculations to try to break the code. And the key thing here is he realized that the way to get this done right was to take humans out of the middle of the loop. And when we think about continuous accounting, that's exactly what we're thinking about. And so, to get there, I mean, it's been obviously a hard problem, but there's a lot of things occurring right now. First, we have new technologies, new advancements. Multi-tenant cloud is an important one, and businesses are still shifting that way. Robotic process automation is key, potentially blockchain, machine learning, artificial intelligence. I would add even just middleware layers to that list. And so these things all make it more possible. On the other hand, there's business changes. So you got the internet's maturing. People are changing their billing models. You've got the Internet of Things. You've got all this regulatory change we talked about. Things are getting more complex. So the issue, and the reason why we include this under this why now section is, continuous accounting, as things get more complex, the value that it brings goes up, and probably goes up exponentially as it gets more possible, because we have more technologies out there, and it truly is in the realm of possibility now. Companies will start to do it, and that means the gap between those that do and those that don't is now growing. And the bigger that gap grows, the more important it is for businesses to think about this very seriously. I mean, if there isn't a big complexity delta, then the difference with or without might not be that great. If there's no technologies that support it and nobody's doing it, hey, don't worry about it, because your competitors aren't going to be doing it. But right now, the technology's there, and the gap is very large. So we'll talk about how we get there. And for the agenda, there's really two parts to it. One is solving sort of the infrastructure part of the problem, and the other is the data flow part of the problem. And I think before that, I thought we had a polling question. Nope. Okay. Let me do this one more slide then. And this slide represents a question. So, when you're thinking about the next steps that we present here, I think one of the first things you have to think about is, am I in a complex business? It is very hard to customize cloud ERP, like we said, but there are some options. If you have a business where you're 100% automated already, and you're in a cloud ERP system, you might be done. I mean, you're probably very close to being able to support continuous accounting. There's a couple things at the end of the presentation we'll talk about that you may need, but other than that, you could be there. If on the other hand, you're in an environment right now where you're 50-50 automation to spreadsheets, or even 80-20, then we're going to present an approach at an infrastructure level on how to get out of that, how to eliminate those spreadsheets. And by the way, if you have that, that bottom bullet point says, and I think the world is going to move this way, consider what are you getting out of the ERP, and should you potentially move to an ERP, a model where you're just using the ERP as a general ledger, and maybe AP/AR questionably, and saving some of those dollars to invest in other parts of the system. And okay, now we get to polling question 2.
There we go. Very simply, is your core ERP on-premise or in the cloud? And are you in the cloud with no customs? Are you able to customize in the cloud? Or if you're on-prem, do you have customizations currently running or not? I'll go ahead and launch polling question 2. And this is another one of those, it's always interesting to see what the audience is doing and what the trends look like from event to event.
Yeah, in hindsight, I think probably the first question would have been in the cloud with no customs or sort of external processes on spreadsheets. But interesting. Yeah, I can see the trend here. One of the interesting things is the number of people that have an ERP that's on-prem with no customs is pretty close to 0, which is not surprising.
A few more seconds. If you're still thinking, please just go ahead and submit that answer. All right, now close it up and share the results here.
Yep. Yeah, so pretty much as expected. Very few running with no customs. And again, I'm just curious if they are running any spreadsheets outside of the core process. Could be yes, could be no. But that would count if they were. And then 50-50. Interestingly, 43% ERP in the cloud and able to customize. I'm pretty sure I have a slide here on why that might not be a great idea, but it caveats on one specific thing. So why don't we go ahead and continue, and when we get to that slide, I'll draw that point out.
Great. Thanks for participating, everybody.
Yeah. So we presented this stack as a model in prior webinars, and it's effectively a layer of technologies, but also kind of steps to take. And it's bottom up. So the bottom start with, have a plan as you go into this. Probably is going to be a plan with multiple steps, multiple projects. We recommend each project has its own value. And then as you move up, look at the functional areas in the environment and figure out where you have the gaps, meaning where is there a lot of human in the loop, a lot of spreadsheets, could be customs, whatever. And figure out a way, just broadly speaking, figure out a way to remove that. Take the humans out of the loops, take the customs out, take the spreadsheets out. Could involve buying point solutions. And some companies would choose to build something, but the key is to get those 3 elements out of the picture. Next step is looking at the data flow actually between modules, also extremely important. And this really speaks, in my mind, to the brittleness factor and the agility factor. So, at the end of the day, I think companies will have to be open to the concept that they may have to either place or replace functional modules to support the different processing areas out of the box again, or potentially have multiple modules for a given functional area. Billing, as an example. Company has grown through acquisition, very different bill types. Might not be one system that supports all the bill types. That data flow layer, in my mind, if you're not running out of a single ERP, if you have point solutions, you probably need to have somebody on staff that's good with integrations, understands API calls, understands concepts around middleware, workflow engines, and the like. And again, for the agility angle, because they will be able to, if there's a mismatch between components that you have, there are things that could be done in those middleware engines that would still allow the components to talk to each other properly without having a ton of, obviously you don't want a ton of logic in there that you have to keep track of, but it really could be a saver. Very similarly, RPA, when we think of RPA, we think of it as potentially driving, data flows between systems you own and potentially systems you don't own. So things go outside of your wall. And then beyond that, artificial intelligence. I really feel like you have to have a good foundation before you can, correctly apply AI. I think there's plenty of value in AI. I think Palantir is doing and will do great things. As an example, they're one of the first companies to really try to commercialize AI. But I think it's out there for a lot of companies, so we won't spend a lot of time on it today. So the next couple of slides I'm going to speed through very quickly, but these are just a little bit more detail on each of the phases we talk about in that overall model. I start with phase 2 because obviously phase 1 is formulate a plan. I just want to go through this detail first, and then we can have a better conversation on the plan. So in phase 2, when we talk about the functional areas, I think one of the first steps is to just, understand what are your functional areas, and try to understand what your manual processes really are, and maybe even write them down, and what's driving those manual processes, importantly, because I'll tell you that 9 times out of 10, when we talk to our clients about this, or prospects rather, the manual processes they're running are actually required because of other manual processes occurring somewhere else in the system. So understanding that, truly what's causing something to need to be manual, I think is critical. Then you have to go out and look to fill the gap. And one thing we would say is that, you're probably going to end up either building something yourself, and the business case for building yourself is tenable at best. If you're operating in an area of complexity, which you probably are, if it's not supported in the ERP, then you're talking about a pretty big investment in not only building but evolving, that functional area to the benefit of one company. Unless you want to go to the business of selling it to others, it's going to be to the benefit of one company, which means in terms of stabilizing through usage over time, it's not likely to happen very quickly. So rough, So you're probably going to end up looking for something out of the box. A couple things. I think it's important to be in the cloud. I think it'd be important that it doesn't involve customizations, and I would look for something where the company is operating on a continuous release process, meaning that you're getting updates as they come out. I know for some it will sound sort of foreign, but you don't want to get version locked in. You want to be able to take advantage of functionality as it comes out by the vendors for each of these areas, and structure your environment to be able to do that. We talk when you're doing evaluations, like let's say you're looking for a billing engine, ideally you try to find something that's used in the way that you intend to use it by a broad group of people. It just helps because it will drive stabilization of that application as it evolves over time, just much more quickly. And again, be open to placing and replacing and possibly running 2 modules for a given functional area. If you do these things today, we feel like there's enough on the market to be able to support the processing that you require in any of the functional areas. There's probably some corner cases and exceptions, but there are things that even could be done there. So that is phase 2. Phase 3, when you're thinking about linking these things up, and a lot of companies have already moved there, but you have to have some kind of internal expertise on in terms of gluing everything together. I mean, if you can't get it done with a single ERP, like we said, if you can get it done with a single ERP and remain agile, then God bless, that's where you want to be. Most companies can't. If you can't, then in-house expertise around a middleware engine, a workflow engine, maybe a homegrown integration layer, although skeptical of the value there, but you have to have it. And keep in mind that integration layer, not only can it help you if there's corner cases that the core functionality in that particular area can't handle, it also helps you with all of the things that need to be done in integrations, error handling, retries, data validation, any transformations that need to occur between modules, you can usually get done there. So anyway, that's why we call it that's why we think it's an important phase 3. RPA, I'm not going to dwell on it too long. The biggest thing for me with RPA is well, a couple of things. One, there's a lot of hype out there on RPA, and I always encourage caution. You can, just like the integration layer, I mean, you can put a ton of logic into these things. You can effectively build applications within a workflow engine or within an RPA. Be careful. I mean, you want to minimize the amount of logic there because it's not going through necessarily like a formal QA process. It may not be contributing to audit logs, things like that. However, if you want to do something like reconciliation between some third-party system and your own system, and you want that to occur continuously without human intervention, and you just want to be notified when something doesn't reconcile, that's where I think our RPA is a great use for something like that, and potentially even automate reconciliations between two internal systems. So now we get to phase one. So the reason why I actually move this to the end is that, given those three things, and those three things, A, should take you very far, and B, are probably enough for now in terms of projects. So as you're thinking about those things, it's important to have a plan, and what we suggest is a plan where you prioritize where are our biggest gains in phase two. So where do we have the biggest gaps? Where are we running the most spreadsheets? Where do we have the most either risk of non-compliance or risk of error, or we have the most manual time spent, et cetera? And look at the trend lines, which area is getting worse fastest, and then address those, come up with a plan, we think ideally come up with a plan to take you all the way through continuous accounting, knowing that you're only going to start, with one particular area, maybe two, and then go on and on and on. And just make sure that each of the projects or sub-projects that you identify have standalone value, so you can present those, you can measure the value as it occurs. As long as the plan makes sense, you should get the value you're expecting, and that value will help you get buy-in for future phases. To conclude the infrastructure piece, there is an Achilles heel here, and this really plagues accounting, and it's let's say you have all of this in place, and let's say you have eliminated spreadsheets within the system, but you have an issue where you're not confident in the data coming in. So a system like a revenue recognition subledger, billing system, if the data is correct and the system is stable, it should be penny accurate, whether you do one transaction or 100 million of them. It should be penny accurate. The Achilles heel comes in is it's not going to know if somebody mistyped a decimal point or misplaced a decimal point. It's not going to know if something got switched and it's the wrong number in a particular cell. And so that's a problem. It's completely garbage in, garbage out, and that can be a thorn in the whole approach. The other, and this is one of the biggest problems, let's say you have all this automation set up, but there's still these front-end processes where Jim calls Sally because an order should change, and Sally, she knows the order needs to change, and she does something off the books to get it done. I mean, how many companies are doing topside journal entries? That's probably a polling question we should include here to cover some of these things. What if you're not recognizing revenue until something ships? And the only way you know it ships is because you get an email from wherever, some internal group or some external group. All of these things are problems. All of these things, like if you have this going on, it's much like the ripple in the pond thing that we described earlier. It really is a limiter to getting to a continuous accounting. And this is where our most advanced prospects or clients get hung up. They've automated a lot, but they've still got all these side processes. And so that's the question we're going to answer in the next section. And before we do, I guess we'll jump into polling question 3.
Excellent. This one's really feeding off the previous polling question. Are you currently running your back office on a single platform, or do you have multiple applications running for various accounting and finance functions? So a few options. You're running on a single platform with no point solutions, no spreadsheets, no customizations. You're leveraging significant customizations of that ERP or of that backbone system that you're using. Or are you running a significant number of applications or spreadsheets? I'll go ahead and launch the poll here.
Interesting. I think we'll probably end up seeing a lot of the option E, but we'll see. D or E, I would say. Maybe a few of A and B.
All right, just a few more seconds here while some last responses are trickling in. And I'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results.
Yeah, so I mean, pretty much as expected. I mean, there's still There's the group of people, the 6% that are basically there or very close to there because they're running a single platform. So that's great. The other majority, actually looks like 90%, are running either a significant number of applications or focusing on D and E. Looks like about just under 80% that have a significant number of spreadsheets or a combination thereof. So, I mean, it's not unexpected, and these are, if you're in that camp of the C, Ds, or Es, or even probably say the Ds or Es, then there probably is a tremendous opportunity in front of you to improve in every metric, really. So,
Great.
yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, with that, we'll get into the next section here. And so, still on the topic of, how do you get there? How do you get to continuous accounting? And the last slide before the polling question, we posed a challenging question, and it's a question we get day in and day out at SOFTRAX. And how do you solve the data flow issue? How do you solve for those situations? There is a classic phrase out there, and I think this phrase is one of the most important phrases to the problem of continuous accounting. If there's doubt, there is no doubt, right? And so what I mean by that in this context is, if there's doubt in terms of the quality of data at any point in the process, then everything that depends on that data, the reports, the dashboards, the very journal entries themselves, there will always be a question about those. And the amount of infrastructure that we've set up over time, we meaning the general public, corporate finance, has set up over time between audits and checking contracts and ITGCs, IT general controls and reconciliation processes, and all of them, late night gnashing during close. I mean, it is ungodly the amount of spend that occurs because of this issue of doubt. And so this part might seem a bit avant-garde, but the reality is the goal needs to be to remove the doubt. How do you remove the doubt? Well, at least the best way that we have thought of, maybe there are other ways, but the best way that we have thought of, at the end of the day, we're talking about monies that are agreed upon between parties, whether it's a digital signature, or some order placed online, if it's a contract that's signed between companies. And we think that CPQ in particular has a tremendous role to play here. And we're not a CPQ company ourselves, so we would take this data in. But with CPQ, if it's done right, you effectively can digitize the agreement with the client. And so, what you're saying basically is, there may be a dollar amount wrong on that. Let's say it's a quote tied to a contract. There might be a dollar amount wrong. There might be a milestone schedule that was incorrect. But at the end of the day, it was agreed upon by both parties, and it is the living representation of that agreement. And so both parties should accept it. It may get modified later, and that would occur through another, digital signature or change order that's signed digitally, perhaps again through CPQ, but it is correct. And so, one of the questions is, why in this day and age do we not have the ability to just reference this at the touch of a button anywhere in the process, right? And just remove doubt. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. One final point I would say is our goal at SOFTRAX is, if this data comes in correctly, we are building the infrastructure downstream such that you should not have to touch it. If we get the right data coming in from CPQ, we're building the infrastructure such that the billing, the revenue recognition, those processes just occur. They're configured to occur. The other thing I would say is that think about the improvement to the client relationship, because at least you're weeding out all of these occurrences of, well, you said I could bill this, you said we could bill over, okay, yeah, we went 20K over, but you thought it was going to be 10K over, all the gnashing and everything. I mean, if you take the discipline of going this approach, then it's countersigned. I mean, there should be clarity, and plenty of work to be done in terms of the quality of whatever you put up in CPQ, but if done right, there should be clarity. So what does this involve? So, again, like we deal in complexity at SOFTRAX. So, I think about all of the different types of, let's say, the billing process, right? Within that CPQ form, this implies that in that CPQ form, not only do you have the amount, let's say the amount you sold something for, but if it's scheduled to be billed on a milestone schedule, you have a list of milestones, the amount that's supposed to be billed per milestone, when the milestones are to occur, and that would get sent down. If you have a sort of a complex subscription, I mean, maybe you're selling, I mean, it could be like data. You're selling bandwidth on a data line, and if a client uses 1,000 minutes a month, it's 5 cents a minute. If they go, 1,000 to 2,000, it's now 3 cents a minute, and there could be minimums and overages and all that stuff. That would show up on these within the quote in CPQ. But with all of that, and all of the downstream processes should be able to run. Those bills should be able to occur. Revenue should be able to recognize. And then we get into more of the problem that we discussed earlier, which is this is not just for the initial order. So, what happens when my revenue recognition is contingent upon shipment? Well, shipment should be a very discrete thing. Something is actually getting shipped. It should be recorded in some system. That trigger through an API integration should go to the revenue recognition engine with the proper data to automatically release the revenue. A human should not have to touch in that case. A client calls up and they say, look, we have this order and we want to make a change, or maybe they're even online. They're in a client portal and you know what, we wanted 50, we want now 50 users, not 30. That could obviously trigger changes to billing. It could trigger changes to revenue recognition. It could trigger a contract modification. Those changes should also be captured. I mean, I'll say in CPQ, let me just more generally say digitally in some way, ideally that at a touch of a button, they could be brought up during any portion of the process. And those seem to be the harder parts. I mean, this is what continually breaks companies' efforts to get to CPQ. Even if they get the initial orders right, the initial orders is like almost the easy part. It's these changes that occur later that are in all of the side processes that occur. Those things are the anathema to getting to continuous accounting, but it is totally doable. I mean, it is totally doable. It just takes time and discipline, but it can be done. And again, think about the amount of pain that goes away if you remove doubt, right? So, so just a couple of further thoughts. So, we talked about the infrastructure. We talked about the how to solve the data flow part of it, and leveraging digitized transactions, etc. At the end of the day, you have to get those pieces correct, and you have to get the full data flow correct, which includes the stuff in the middle, the integration points to make sure that data is passed from system to system, again, without doubt. So which means, at minimum, if there is an error, there's proper notification. It cannot exist without a notification, and a known path and planned path for remediation. There will be corner cases that come up, probably more likely around the post-processing scenarios like we described. But let me say this. To this point, we've seen a number of difficult ones, but we have not yet seen one that can't be handled in the context of continuous accounting. Probably not enough time to go into examples of it, but all the ones that, even the ones that we thought would be very difficult to solve, when you really dig into it, the thing that was preventing solution was something really not being done right in some other part of the system. And so, and we're not a middleware vendor by any means here. So, this is not speaking selfishly, but, this is one of the reasons why we recommend middleware in your technology stack somewhere, and an internal expertise on it. Because if you do have to glue these systems together, then what we've seen is we have seen problems that have come up where it just didn't make sense to solve that particular problem within one of the prepackaged modules. it was like a transformation or something like that, and the middleware engine saved the day. And I would say it's really key to agility, because sometimes you're trying to solve a problem because you need it solved like literally right now. And even though you have a great relationship with your vendor, it could take them at least weeks, if not months, to implement a change in their own solution. And you're really trying to avoid. I mean, the easiest thing is, okay, well, I'll just do it in a spreadsheet for now. You really want to avoid that. That is like a virus against continuous accounting. And as far as the skill sets go, the biggest challenge that I can tell you that we have at SOFTRAX is that we need people that really know accounting very well, and we need people that really know technology and think like engineers and can build systems very well. And ideally, we would find people that have both in one, but it's very hard. And so in a finance organization, I mean, you have already probably good resources, hopefully. I mean, everybody's moving to the cloud thinking they can get rid of all their IT guys, and I just don't think it's a safe way to go or a true statement. So I would look at this as much an engineering problem as a finance problem, because you will need the skill sets if you want to hit continuous accounting anyway, full-blown continuous accounting. You'll need the skill sets, but if you do that, if you have the right skill sets, not only will you get there, but you'll be able to maintain being there. And I think that gets us to polling question 4.
Excellent, and very good timing as we're hitting that 50-minute mark of the hour. Question very simply, which of the following is your company most seriously considering taking advantage of in order to automate finance and accounting tasks? Is that RPA? Is that artificial intelligence? Evaluating anything on the blockchain? I'll go ahead and launch the poll. Or maybe there's something else. If there's something else that you think might make a difference, feel free to put it in the question box, and it might be interesting as well.
Let's see. Interesting. More people considering AI than I thought so far. Might be there, but it's definition of considering too, because so we haven't seen a lot of what I would call practical implementations of AI that are yielding, measurable value yet. A few, but very, very few number. Very little on blockchain, which isn't surprising. Blockchain is a fantastic technology, but I don't think it has really a strong place in corporate back office finance. And then RPA is, it's higher, which I would expect. I'm actually surprised it's not higher than it is. So,
great. I'll just go ahead and close in another few seconds. If you're still, if you haven't voted yet, please go ahead and do so. All right, now close, and I will share the results on the screen.
Yeah, so 37% on RPA. I'm a little surprised that isn't higher. And then I am surprised that the AI is as high, but that could be just initial consideration. Maybe we'll refine this question going in future webinars just to see how many people have gotten practical value so far. I know there's going to be tremendous value from it. I just think it's out there a little bit. And then a healthy amount of none of the above, which doesn't surprise me either. That's what we've seen so far as well. My only comment here would be I do think that there's a lot that says take some of these steps to get toward continuous accounting before considering a number of these technologies, just because to get good value from that investment on these and to maintain it, you kind of need a lot of the infrastructure and the data flow that we're describing here. So
great. Yep. I'll go ahead and hide that.
All right. Let's go ahead and advance here. Whoops, wrong screen. So, just in conclusion, so just a small commercial on SOFTRAX. If these concepts make sense to you and if the value makes sense, SOFTRAX has been spending the last decade really developing solutions to support a continuous accounting approach. I think, from an order to revenue recognition perspective, I think we're there. I think we're 95% of the way there. Billing, I think we're extremely close. And so if those are areas where you have challenges, whether it's milestone billing, subscription billing, transactional billing, even contract renewal management, I think a lot of functionality. Or if you just want, to consult with us in terms of, a plan for continuous accounting, we have people that have been doing this literally for 20 years, have thousands of implementations under their belt. We would be happy to talk to you. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And I will say we'll have some even more exciting news as we get into Q1, Q2 in the coming year. So definitely stay tuned for that.
And my contact is on the screen, so feel free to reach out. I'll be glad to have a conversation and to introduce you to the team if that's the route you want to go. Tom, we do have a couple of questions, and it looks like we have, it's good timing. We have a few minutes left over. So one of them, I see you mentioned, middleware solutions, a couple of points, that help facilitate this transition. Can you give a couple of examples of middleware solutions like you were referring to?
Yeah, and I can speak a little bit on this. So for example, Boomi or Del Boomi is a MuleSoft, both examples of middleware. People used to use the term more frequent, like enterprise service bus as an example of middleware. We at SOFTRAX have a middleware engine. We actually use a workflow engine for our middleware engine. And so, one of the interesting things is that it's not uncommon for multiple middleware engines to be found in a given company. In our case, we built this, we leveraged this middleware engine for companies that didn't already have one. So if your company is standardized on MuleSoft as an example, you probably have people there that know MuleSoft, can work in MuleSoft, maintain it, and so you probably would want to keep using MuleSoft. We sell to a number of companies that don't have anything for middleware, and so this would be a logical thing to use. Through it, we've actually been able to productize the integration layer, and by that I mean, a robust integration not only sends data from point A to point B, but it will actually make the attempt to send the data. If the attempt fails, it'll retry. It might retry up to some settable amount, 3 times, 5 times, whatever. If it can't do it, it will issue an error, but not only issue that error, but it'll handle it. And in our case, handling means it will do one of a certain set of steps, probably culminating with an email to a pre-configured set of people saying, I couldn't move this data over, or elements of this data didn't pass my data validations, meaning that a critical field was missing. Shouldn't really occur, but if upstream involves hand data entry, could occur. So that's an example of a few of the commercially available middleware engines, the one we use, and why we use it, basically. Other uses, let's take revenue recognition, let's take services information coming from some upstream PSA system. So, some services are billed T&M, and you recognize the revenue effectively as it's billed, or at least as the hours worked are entered in the system. Sometimes, it's more of a milestone type of bill or something, or let's just say it's a larger project, and you're recognizing revenue based on the cumulative percent of completion. It used to be called percent of completion, in terms of percent of transfer under 606. So our system is built to take in cumulative percent of transfer metrics as a percentage. We encounter some systems that the upstream system just doesn't and can't calculate that. Obviously, they don't want to do it manually. And so there's no place to automate it, but it's easy within our workflow engine to say, okay, then just pass me the total project duration and pass me the hours spent to date, and the middleware engine will calculate it and pass it forward. Or some cases, the middleware engine could even store the cumulative hours for the project, and you just pass it the actuals, and it figures out what the cumulative percent transfer should be. So those are uses of middleware, but there are corner cases that will come up where you'll be like, what, it doesn't make sense to do it in this module doesn't do it. We just need to get this one thing done to keep our automation whole, without customizing anything, blah, 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 and you may end up doing it in middleware. So that's why we think it's critical to continuous accounting.
Great. Thanks very much, Tom.
Yep.
So it looks like we are coming right up to the end here. Tom, do you have any final thoughts? If anyone else has any questions, feel free to submit them anyway, and we will reach it afterwards. We'll make sure to provide answers to those. Anyone who is CPE eligible, like I said, we'll go ahead and we'll distribute those certificates via email, so no further effort required on your part. Tom, do you have any thoughts to leave us off on?
No, thank you all for joining. If you think of questions after the session, or if you would like to talk to us at SOFTRAX, you can just reach me through Ian's email address. He'll get the message to me, and again, my name's Tom Zauli, so it's just tom.zauli@softrax.com. And we'd love to talk to people about these problems, so don't hesitate.
Excellent. Well, thanks a lot, Tom. I appreciate it, and thank you everyone who joined us today, and we hope to speak to you soon. Have an excellent afternoon, and thanks very much for your time.
Have a great Thanksgiving, everybody. Bye.